I'm going to start is introducing you as in where I met you, which was at SFAS, Special Forces Assessment and Selection. And my first memory of you is of you as an asshole, because you were the one guy that beat me on all but one of the sprints during long and rifle PT.
Yep.
And the person who won those got to take a break. So you were that asshole who was getting to take a bit of a break while I was like huffing and puffing because I tried to keep up and or beat you. And I think I beat you on one, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, I showed up to selection straight from Boulder, so straight from like living at, almost a mile above or over a mile above sea level. And then I think my log was actually the closest to the end of the pit. And so it was like a total sandbag for like anyone else, because like you were like starting 10 yards behind me on like every race.
I think I was like the second log from the furthest away point of the pit.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like very unfair, but I was like, well, I mean, whatever. I'm not taking it. So
you got to rest a little bit longer than the rest of us while we were doing like additional squats or whatever they made us do.
Yeah, I don't even remember. I just remember thinking like that was like the one part of selection I was like kind of worried about, and then we did it, and I was like, oh, that was it.
Yeah. Yep. Yes, that was a fun time, I guess you could say. But so I asked you on because the thing I'm like building, this tactical alpinism thing, is the concept I have is to combine what I've learned in the military navigation wise and taught in the military navigation wise, and bring some of the best practices, both navigation and planning, and make them more readily available in the mountain space so people can make better decisions. So I asked you to come on and talk it because I know you crush it in the mountains, and then also have a solid background in like the way the Army and the military do navigation, because you did the STAR course, you did all the training that I did there as well, which was some of the best land navigation training I've done in the Army, some of the better land navigation training I've done in the Army, as far as the way they taught it. So for you, I'm curious, like what your trajectory to going to SFAS looked like, from your time living in Boulder and the mountains and whatnot.
Well, I mean, my trajectory is super weird, right? Because I like enlisted after law school. So I, basically got in touch with the SF dudes here in Colorado because I came in through the Guard, which is like this totally different pathway than the active duty. I was like this weird, like long story short, I was like essentially this really long workaround version of like the Guard version of the 18 X-ray program. But I like, trained with them here and like got kind of selected to go to selection. And then, so we did some land nav, obviously like land nav training. I would say it is a big upside. The Guard guys show up pretty prepared because they kind of get to groom them for it. It's kind of like the Ranger thing, the Rangers have a pre-Ranger everything. They have like a pre-SOCM, they have a pre-Ranger, they have a pre to the pre. And I also had a like background in the outdoors already. I mean, I'd been climbing. I'd already been like all over the world, like Chamonix and Patagonia and all this. So I was like quite comfortable in mountain environments, or just being outdoors in general and like being by myself and dealing, which that stuff is mostly just about like not losing your shit when you're alone, or when things don't go quite as planned, which I'm pretty used to.
Yeah, and the military generally uses land navigation as a way to like test your practical intelligence.
Right.
Like, and the quote I remember from the SAR major at that course was, "We can fix weak, we can't fix stupid." So that was their reason. That was what he was using as his reason why they use land navigation there, to test really competence and ability to pick up new information, and then execute it. One of the things that was funny to me is that the first time I met somebody else named Maury outside of my family was while we were both doing this course, and you just happened to be a climber as well.
Yeah.
So kind of a weird deja vu there.
Yeah, it was a really funny overlap. Yeah. And I mean, and it's true. It's like, it's just a tool. The Army uses land nav, the SEALs use water. Like they're all just picking a tool to try and like, throw people for a loop and then see how they react. Right.
Yeah. But that tool gives some cool skills that you
Yeah.
can use if you need to, like, and really I'd say because of the prevalence of technology now and the ability to plan before and then also know routes and get beta offline, like that tool I'd say is used very minimally, but when you need it, you need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for you, like I know you've done some planning for some routes that like remotely before you go and do them. So you did your Alaska mission last year, if you're open to talking about that. I'm curious how you like planned that out from afar.
Yeah.
If you can talk through that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because the translation from like land nav to the technical routes is very different, but I'd say it differs in degree, like not kind so much. So like, even if it's a single pitch, I was kind of thinking about this in preparation. Like if I'm climbing like a technical rock route and I'm trying to stay on the route, like it's very obvious like where the mountain is. I mean, that's not really a question. That's clear.
Yeah, the application of using a compass in a map does not apply once you hit technical terrain.
Oh,
No, you look good, Maury. I can see you.
There we go. Looks like I lost you for a sec.
Yeah, I was just saying that the application of the principles is just different in degree, not kind. So like I still use things, if you think broadly, like the way I land nav in the big mountains or like on the star course is like backstops. Like I pick a direction or like shoot an azimuth if we're talking on the fire point. And then I typically just pick landmarks and backstops and just.
What's a backstop?
So yeah, backstop is just like, if I hit this river, I've kind of gone too far.
Mhm.
And a landmark would be, I'm going to head to like the star course, right? Like I'm going to head to the church and then that's going to get me in like the right general vicinity. And then I know that I'm close and I know I have a fixed point and then I'm going to go off of that. Similarly in the mountains, you'll do that. Like you say, you're covering long distances. It's always easiest. Like, oh, we're going to head towards that thing, right? The big obvious thing, rather than it may be a little bit off from where you're going, but it's a lot easier to just work off of than like trying to dick around with, like 0.5 degrees and like 100 steps or like go 2 miles exactly. It's like, I just think it's better to go a little bit further and faster. And then once you get kind of close to then dial it in.
Yes. So, and one of the techniques there is attack points.
Where
like you have an obvious known feature.
Yeah. And I was calling that landmarks. Yeah. Attack points is, I think, what the Army calls them. I mean, obviously like an extreme, this is geared more towards like the mountains, like in an extreme tactical scenario, there's other considerations like, the enemy that maybe you factor in, but,
in the mountains, I call the enemy the reality of like
right.
the weather, the terrain, etc.
Totally. And then that becomes a consideration, right? If there's certain kinds of terrain you need to avoid, or in particular like snow and ice. So it really depends, but yeah, it may just be on a pitch, like rather than like, I tend to zero in on things that are going to be really obvious, whether in a good or bad way, versus like trying to follow nuance. So like climb the pitch to the end of the crack and then take a hard right, or like don't go into the big chimney, it's like, oh shit, like make sure that I have that in mind and like take a right on a pitch before I get into the chimney.
Sure.
Like just those kinds of things.
Yeah, so like Alaska has some special considerations in like not looking at the technical route per se. Like how'd you set up your plan to even get to the base of the route?
Yeah, that stuff all depends, right? Because it also depends too if you're talking about like the West Buttress of Denali, which I haven't done, but that's like really big mountain terrain. With the caveat there that you're probably just going to be following a track on that thing. But let's say there's not, right? that's where you're in really big terrain and you probably want to have a map and compass no matter what, because you could just totally get lost, especially, you know, if the weather's bad. Like the technical stuff we're climbing, like Mount Huntington, I mean, the plane is landing us at the base and we're just like, well, there's the mountain. And then you're identifying the main features that you're going to climb as part of your route. And so
the problem was getting to the base of the route, and you really had the options of like walking, taking a snowmobile, or flying.
Yeah. So we flew in, and then it was only like, you know, 20 minutes to the base, which we walked instead of skied because we didn't want to like go back and get our skis. But you know, like on 11,300 the year before is kind of funny. I mean, it's like 15 minutes to the base of 11,300. But the snow conditions were so bad, it took us like, it was over an hour. I want to say it was like, I was like crawling on all fours at one point, and it was kind of crevasse terrain as well. So yeah, those are all sorts of considerations too. Like you're looking at that when you're in glaciated terrain too, then you're considering like, you know, concavities versus convexities, because you know, if something's convex, it's more likely to be broken up and crevassed, and so you want to be particularly mindful, and you're probably going to avoid those features, and you're going to stay in concavities because it's more likely to be closed up.
Can you discuss that a little bit more for people that may not know crevasse terrain?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty like easy to just visualize. Like if, you know, if these are all crevasses or like, you know, fracture points, like in a glacier, right, when it's laying flat, if you fold that over something convex, it opens up, right? Versus if I fold it this way, it pushes together and it's more likely to be closed up. And so,
yeah, so if the glacier if I'm hearing you accurately, if the glacier goes over higher ground underneath, or a spot where it is pushed up, then it's more likely to have crevasses. And the other spot within that to my knowledge is where it turns to, like the outside of the turn is more likely to have crevasses. So where it's like bigger going around instead of the inside where it's smaller, kind of like a river eating away at the bank.
oh yeah. So there's the vertical and the horizontal considerations. Yep. Sorry, yeah. So you're talking about on a linear plane when it's pivoting through big terrain. Yeah, the outside is going to have to catch up, right? And the inside is going to scrunch down. And then similarly, if it's like this, you know, when it's on a hilltop, like a convexity, it's more likely to open up.
Yep.
Versus at the bottom of a, you know, at a concavity, it's more likely to be closed up. So yeah, you're just kind of considering all those things. And then you're picking, you know, obviously we're like spying a part of the Bergschrund, which is the Bergschrund is kind of the separation between the glacier and the mountainside. And typically that's opened. It is broken, is pulled away. And I mean, sometimes Bergschrunds can be like the worst part, you know. We have kind of gotten lucky that I've never collapsed and whipped into a Bergschrund.
Sure.
Like trying to get up and over. Yeah, and then like for like Huntington, for example, and we got into like the couloirs the first 1,000 or 1,500 feet, and that was just pretty obvious. Like we were just simul climbing for like 3 hours.
Yeah. So the technical route, other than like route finding on rock, is generally straightforward. But like the thing that you're talking here is being sort of the crux of getting to the route, because you have to get to the route to do it.
Totally. Yeah.
Like I imagine you're looking at the terrain from afar and like identifying where there could be cruxes on the glacial travel.
Yeah, we were. I mean, in that case, you know, the case of Huntington, it was fairly straightforward, the glacier travel, because we were just like so close to the route. But we were actually more concerned with the route itself. And we spent a lot of time looking at the face. And we actually audibled the route halfway up. Because we came out of the first, we climbed this thing called the Colton Leach, which the first like 1,500 feet is this big ice couloir. And then on once it tops out that couloir, which was like 45 minutes of like chopping through a cornice. I actually swung into my own arm at one point. That was painful. Yeah. And then we're like up on this sunny face, and it was like quite warm, and it was in May. And so the snow was pretty sloppy, and the traditional Colton Leach like took all these kind of snow ramp features up and right, towards the right side of the mountain. And we just like kind of weren't that into the idea of a lot of steep snow travel from a safety perspective, but also just a practicality. I was kind of worried that as the snow steepened up to gain this right-hand ridge where it would join the traditional Harvard route, I was like, I don't know if we'll be able to do it. Like the steep snow just might be like totally like sloughy and like impossible. Versus straight up, there was all these rock buttresses. And I was like, well, I kind of know I can always rock climb. So we opted to instead go like straight up through the rock. And that was like purely conditions based. And I mean, for example, I talked to Inez Paper because she and Luca had climbed it, I want to say the year before. And like we climbed the first half of the route, which was the ice couloir in like, I don't know, less than 4 hours. And then it took us another 12 hours to gain the ridge, the French Ridge. Where we took the snow ledges like once we hit those, it was just like, you know, the same, if not less time. Right.
Yep.
So it was quite a bit slower on the rock. I actually did almost get knocked off by slough avalanche, but I think it was the right call because that snow was just like so shitty. And like, even if there had been a bit of gear between us, if anyone had whipped, it would have just been a massive, like taking a slough like off the mountain, like, you know, falling 100 feet.
Yep.
And I was climbing some run out rock, but rock is rock, you know?
Yeah.
So
like rock, like is, from what I understand of you, your happy place and your comfort zone. So talk to me about how you like, because, well, let's transition, I guess, into the speed record on the diamond. Say, like, why was like doing that as a like rock objective something that attracted your attention?
Oh, well, that's like, yeah, there's a lot of factors on that. I mean, it was a hometown thing, you know, that was as much as anything, it was COVID, right? And I mean, in general, yeah, I'm just fairly comfortable on rock, and especially rock that's been well traveled. So, you know, I had done it once with a friend who, like with a short rope, like simul climbing, and we did it quite quickly. And he was like, "Oh, do you want to go for the speed record?" And I was kind of like, "Well, I mean, dude, honestly, we're running it out like 50 to 100 feet, and you know, it is, yes, it is safer, but I'd really always just wanted to solo it anyways." And
Was that Stefan?
no, that was Wade. So then Wade and Stefan did break Dean's time. So Dean Potter had the original record at 3:59. Then that summer I did it with Wade. Then he practiced a bunch with Stefan because I didn't want to do it. And then they set it at like 3:54 or 3:53:59. And then I tried it that summer, came up short, and then came back the next year and set the record. So yeah, on solid rock like that, I just, that's about as comfortable for me as I could be, because, you know, especially something like the casual route, like anything loose has been pulled off. And yeah, it is very much a solid feeling for me. And then in the big mountains, yeah, I mean, just rock gear is rock gear, you know, I mean, yeah, a solid screw is great if you find good ice. But in that instance, like on Huntington, and honestly, like even on 11,300, for the most part, it's not like you're climbing like ice runnels, you know, you're kind of either on like weird snow or rock buttresses. So I'm like, well, I'll take my chances with rock where I know that even if it's super run out, which it was at times, I can at least get some gear and keep the team on the mountain.
Yeah, so you were mitigating risk there by sticking to your strengths and like knowing your strengths is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, for sure.
When it comes to choosing a partner for those objectives, what do you do to like, or yeah, do you have considerations about having different strengths in the team? And what does that look like?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, as a first order, I only climb with people that I have fun climbing with, because it's just climbing and it doesn't mean anything. I'm just doing it to have fun. So that's kind of my first consideration.
Rule number one, have fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's friends first, summit second, safety third.
Sure.
So, yeah. So I pick, I mean, I go with partners based on how much fun we have together, and then, what relative, I mean, I think we kind of, obviously it's like a relative parity in our abilities, but then relative strengths. And so like my friend Brian, that I do a lot of that stuff with, is I'm a bit more bold, and stronger, like on hard technical terrain, but he foolishly took a few years off climbing when he had a kid and did triathlons. And he's just like he's a really good climber. But he's just also this like grade engine. He can just like kind of keep like back on. Oh, looks as though you froze. There you
I
go.
can still hear you.
Cool. Like on Huntington, I led almost everything. He led like one block in the couloir, but I led like 90% of the climbing up to the ridge. And so after that, like 12 hours of, 5'9", 5'10", like RX climbing, I was like kind of fried mentally, and it was like 11 or 12 p.m. We got to the ridge, and the ridge is like a different kind of fucked up. Like it's just weaving these cornices and like punching through. Like I punched through at one point, and he just like took over, and I was able to just like turn my brain off and like put my head down. And he's got a lot of mountain sense. He's spent a lot of time in the big mountains, and so his ability to just like navigate that terrain that wasn't like highly technical, but like very mentally exhausting, because like every step you're like, am I going to punch through this cornice and go for a ride? That was massive because it allowed me to just like fully go for it on the hard technical stuff and like lay it all out there. And then when I was kind of like done, he could just like take the rope and like gun the team. So.
And a lot of people who want to get in the mountains can't do it as often as they like to or would want to. And like, yes, the best way to build mountain sense is to spend time in that space. I'm curious what your recommendations are for people that can't make it into the mountains as much as they would like to build their like mountain sense and or decision making.
I would say just do it anyways. No. Yeah, I mean, the best thing you could do is get experience. I mean, I remember like a gal I was skiing with a little, like she was like getting into backcountry skiing and like took an avalanche 1 course, and like every time she went out, I mean, basically all an avalanche 1 course teaches you is that, like, you're gonna die if you go outside. And so every time we went out, she was like terrified. She was like, what about this? What about this? And I was like, I'm happy to narrate, but you kind of just need to get 100 days. Like you kind of just need to follow me around for 100 days. And like, you just kind of get a feel, and you can tell what snow feels like and what it sounds like. It doesn't mean that I'm like, shut up and follow. It's like, I will talk out loud. There is a degree of like needing to spend the time in the environment. And then I would say fitness. We talk, my friends and I talk a lot about this, because like having a lot of friends that have died in the mountains, and like you analyze accidents, and some things are just like, your number was up. But I think it's always important to analyze, ARR, if we're being Army about it. What went well, what could have been done better. And I think one thing that we've learned is that like, you will always make mistakes, like you will never do it perfectly. But fitness and technical proficiency can make up for a lot. And I certainly would never want to like make bad decisions thinking that my fitness will compensate, but just knowing that fitness and technical proficiency can oftentimes get me out of a bad situation. That's something I think I would emphasize to folks is like, okay, if you live in Washington, D.C. and you can't spend as much time as you'd like on ice and snow, well, at least just get really strong and fit because then if you run into a super shitty isothermic snow slope where you're post holing like up to your waist, you're not going to get completely wrecked by it, as if you had shown up less physically prepared. And that will go a long way, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
in a friend of ours, Scott Johnson, like he talks about how one of the people he trained like lived in New York City, a vertically challenged environment where that guy would do like 10,000 vertical feet in the stairwell of a building.
oh really?
Get that uphill training in. And it's
Yeah,
like,
man.
if you have that, as you said, if you have that engine, then you can go. And I even found as I built my aerobic engine that my climbing, my ability to recover on the wall improved, even though my strength declined. So I was still able to rock climb just almost as hard. Like I was lacking some of the finger strength, but if it was an endurance thing, then I was way, way better off because I was able to recover on the wall. And I completely agree with the aerobic engine. And then as far as building technical skill, one of the things I've done in the past, because I went to school at a location where we didn't have a lot of rock climbing right there, and we were restricted on how far we could travel. So one of the things we did is we had a 20-foot retaining wall that had like these massive, massive blocks, and we would just do 20 pitches along the base of that retaining wall to build that, like the transition skill when we couldn't actually get out into the mountains. So like, that's a technique I would recommend, is that like, if you have the trad gear, you could always do transitions moving like horizontally along the base of a wall.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, and you brought up transitions, which are also a really important thing, which is a technical proficiency thing, right?
Yep.
Like just being able to hit the belay, switch over and like take off, and it doesn't take you 10 minutes every time. So I think obviously being strong and fit so you can climb the pitches quickly, but then the technical ability to just hit the belay, boom, switch over, keep going. That makes a really big difference. It's funny when we're talking about the fitness thing. Actually, Honnold loves to quote all the time. I think is it General Patton? The fatigue makes coward of us all.
Yep.
That Patton quote, yeah. Like he says it all the time, right? That once you get tired, like everything just starts to go downhill, right? Like you're tired, so you climb slower and more conservatively, so you get more tired because you're climbing, it's taking you longer.
Then you get scared and your heart rate goes up, and the fear keeps building, so you get pumped. Yeah,
totally. Rather than just being like, I'm not that, like, oh, I'm comfortable, like I don't have to stop and place gear every 5 feet because like I feel good. And
speaking of Alex, you've done some things with him, to put it mildly, I think. And then I actually read a quote while I was Googling your name to see what came up, and where he said that you smoked him on one of his training runs before the cuddle.
Oh, really? Did he say that?
Yeah. That's not an exact quote, but he said he felt like beat up after going out for a day with you in the mountains.
Yeah, I mean, that's a rare leg up I get, but I mean, I certainly can outrun Alex, right? So anything that's like more like running quickly, even just now, like before the HURT, when he was here this summer, like we went out and did Blitzen Ridge up in the park, and it was kind of funny because we were like running out. It was like him and my girlfriend and I, and I was kind of stretching it out on the stride, and he knew that I was coming to Vegas and we were going to like go soloing to practice for the HURT. And he was like, well, I'm going to return the favor, you know?
Yeah.
Once we got under the rock climbing, but
yeah. So you were part of the cuddle, you were part of the HURT. So before we go into the planning and preparation for that, can you talk like what those two things were and then what your role was in them?
Yeah. So the cuddle was spelled poorly, the Continental Divide Ultimate Link Up. So CDUL, although I was like, guys, just make it the Continental Ultimate Divide Link Up, and then it spells cuddle and no one's going to be upset. And then the HURT was Honnold's Ultimate Red Rocks Traverse. We had a lot of alternate names. It was also potentially going to be the Hurl, Honnold's Ultimate Red Rocks Link Up, but he didn't throw up. The Hibdo was I can't remember. I had the Hurrah, Honnold's Ultimate Red Rocks.
Hibdo sounds like a playoff of Rhabdo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was like a playoff Rhabdo. Mine was the Hurrah because I thought it might, it's got a kid now, might be his last hurrah. The Honnold's Ultimate Red Rocks achievement hike. But yeah, so both of those are big sort of link ups. The Cuddle was in Rocky Mountain National Park, and that was more Tommy Caldwell's vision. With another friend of ours, Adam Stack, and Real Rock has a great little film about it. But basically, it was a lot of skyline that Tommy can see from his porch up in the park. It's not totally linear. There's a few sort of like kind of goes up Longs and then down into Glacier Gorge, and then it goes out to Alice and then back in. And but it's like more or less logical-ish. Although a lot of like, dropping back in to climb a rock route and then back up. And then the HURT is pretty rad because you just look at red rocks and it's just the skyline. Exactly. And it was like Alex linking up that skyline, but via the most classic technical rock routes he could. So whenever possible, going up or down a classic rock route. So he did a lot more climbing up, but he down climbed a handful of, classic like 5.6 to 5.8. And
difficulty in those two, with like a lot of the objective being like the vertical terrain and climbing on rock. So how you've mentioned before they use some like ultra running considerations and then some of your experience in the mountains. So can you talk me through how you prepared the logistics for whichever one you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, my role was just support in both and like some prep and training. So like for the Cuddle, Alex came out, Tommy wasn't in town. We went out for a few of his first days in the park and like did some of the routes, did some big link ups, and like you're talking about that first day, I got him pretty wrecked. I mean, I had the advantage of he was coming from more or less sea level, I think. And
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Coming from sea level. So
yeah, whenever you get the opportunity. So we did a couple days with some link ups of a few of the routes on the Cuddle. And then I supported them in the first part, kind of from 5 a.m. to noon, and then met back up with them the next morning. So that would have been I don't know, high 20, 28, 30 hours in.
Yeah. So you talked about, as we were actually hiking up Landslide, you talked about where what you did to link up with them, and get them some of their support. What that look like?
Yeah. So I left the car with them, and went up, Meeker and Longs. I scrambled easy routes while they climbed the flank buttress, which was 5.9 or 10A, and then casual route. And I was able to sort of scramble next to them, this Dreamweaver Couloir thing on flank buttress, and then go up Keeners, which is next to the casual route, which saved me even some vert actually. And then they took off on their long odyssey, and all this funny shit happened. It's in the movie. They missed an equipment pickup, which was an important lesson, by the way, of they kind of blew it, to be honest. We didn't know that they had the kid that they gave this cash to had critical gear, headlamps and pants in it. Which I think is kind of that's a good planning lesson, that if you have critical gear to if you're going to cache that or whatever, and you're going to be fully relying on it, you need to be really certain that it's going to work out, or you need to carry it with you.
Yeah. So what happened there? And then what was the sort of the lesson learned 2020 hindsight?
Yeah, basically what happened is they picked this guy to resupply them that didn't really have much experience in the mountains. And I think he may have gotten a little bit of altitude sickness, but I think more than anything had a panic attack. And he was untested and unproven,
So planning wise, I haven't watched the movie. Mm-hmm. Was the cache not placed ahead of time before they started?
No. We were resupplying them. And so collectively. And so they were oh, we're going to leave this bag if you'll bring it with you up into Glacier Gorge. And it had food and water, but it also had their headlamps and pants as they transitioned into the night. And so when he freaked out, he just left with everything and like hiked out and just left them hanging.
So 2020 hindsight, then what would you do differently if you were them?
I would at least have my pants and headlamps with me, if not the food and water, or a little bit more food and water. Yeah, I mean, that bottom line, or I would pick someone that I know is a known quantity.
And what about placing a cache ahead of time? I recognize there are restrictions in the park, but would that have been a feasible solution?
Yeah, it would have. I mean, it would have, you just can't cache there for more than like 24, 48 hours. So it would have just necessitated hiking in. And I know guys that have tried to repeat the cutoff that did that, right? That went in like the day before basically and just like stashed some stuff. But like the terrain is really big in the park, which is part of what makes the cuddle. I mean, the cuddle,
it's steep. It's steep.
Yeah, and it's just like a lot of hiking. Like the cuddle is a lot of hiking with some rock climbing. Versus the HURT was a lot more compressed because Red Rocks is just like a lot of like it's down. Even though the mileage on the two looked the same, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. What about the vertical though?
I think the HURT was a whole lot more vertical.
Yeah, the HURT from what I remember seeing was 18,000 vertical. I don't know what the cuddle was.
No, the HURT was 24,000 plus.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean the watch said like 28. And then Alex cleaned up a bunch of GPS like squiggles and it was like maybe 24. So it's probably a little more than 24, right? Because cleaning it up probably cleaned it up too much. It's hard to say. But yeah, you could pre-cache. But that was like another thing, like even for the HURT that Alex thought about like caching food and water. But he was kind of worried that he was going to show up and something was going to be gone.
Yeah, because I mean, in the park you have marmots which love to eat salty sweet things. And like, yes, you can mitigate, but you never know if that stuff's gonna disappear on you too. So it's a risk.
Yeah, relying on a pre-placed cache is certainly risky, I think, in any event. I mean, and then in the big mountains people do it, but it's like you show up and an avalanche swept your backpack off the mountain, or some asshole Brit decided he wanted to use your gear. And
like Denali, I mean, West Buttress, super common during acclimation to go place a cache high at like 13K on an acclimation day, and then go and then move to 14, go pick it up later on a rest day. So you're only doing like 1,000 feet of vert. And like, yeah, somebody could totally just swipe your cache if they wanted to. So there's a risk there when you're leaving something unobserved.
Totally. I mean, and you hear it, people justify it a lot of the time, right? Like, oh, I really needed it. I mean, the most extreme example is like on Everest, which like, who cares about Everest? I think it's totally stupid, but it's a good acute example of people get really high on Everest and they're like, they feel terrible or whatever, for whatever reason, they're just like, I really needed more oxygen. And so they steal someone's cached oxygen that like another group has cached. And they're like, we were in trouble without it. And it's like, well, you're always in trouble at 28,000 feet, dude. Like that's kind of, and yeah, so it's pretty bad form really ever to take someone else's gear. And you can pretty much always find a reason that you are entitled to it. But if you didn't put in the work,
if you want, where there's a will, there's a way, and you can find a reason to justify it. But ultimately you're screwing somebody else who put that stuff there and planned on being able to rely on it. Right. So like there's sort of two sides there. Is like it's a risk to rely on it, and then you're also, if somebody picks it up, they're screwing you, but they're also thinking about their own ass first.
Totally. And it's hard, and then like places on OCAP, right? People will cache food and water and like they'll put notes on it, but like some people will still take it, that kind of thing. So yeah, ultimately, just for a number of reasons, I mean, it's always, if someone can be relied upon to bring it to you, that's kind of like a better thing if you know that person is reliable. And so even
go ahead.
Well, as I say, so the cuddle experience was part of the reason, like for the HURT, Alex was like, he was like, well, I kind of need the A team on this one to like support, because A, I need to know they're actually going to show up and be reliable, and B, the terrain is like fairly complex. And so it can't just be some dude that shows up and you just like point to a map, right? And so so the support guys were myself, and just I have like a pretty high degree of technical proficiency, and like I haven't done a whole lot in Red Rocks, but I've done enough that I know some of the terrain, and then just combined with like my general like technical ability and like mountain sense. And then this other guy, Chris Gorney, who is an ultra runner, like kind of incidentally funny, he like won this race that made him like a state marathon champion by accident. And he has like some FKTs in Red Rocks, and he's not really a climber, but like fourth, low, fifth class terrain, he scrambles a lot. And so his ability to navigate those mountains, especially in the dark, was pretty crucial to be relied upon. And Alex had learned his lesson, I think, from the cuddle of just like, if I don't like know that like you 100% can deal and will be there, then like didn't want to bother.
Yeah. And you mentioned training and technical proficiency as being the really two things that people can do if they don't have the ability to get out as often. And one thing I'm going to highlight from the cuddle and then the HURT especially is that it was progressive in nature. Like the cuddle had more horizontal distance and the HURT had more vertical distance. Like, so the cuddle progressed into the HURT and was the inspiration, but also like Alex did a lot of preparation. Like you talked about how you guys went and climbed, I believe it was epinephrine, if I remember correctly, at a minimum. So that part was rehearsed. He had also tried for the FKT on epinephrine at some point. So that was a continued progression.
Yeah, I mean, he has the speed record.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't realize he'd gone that yet. So yeah, but it's like mentioning training. It's like, if you want to climb a 20 pitch route, like, can you do 20 pitches in the day of single pitch is a way to progress into it. And same with like looking at an objective where you know you need to cover, say, 7,000 feet of vert on your biggest day. It's like, okay, can you do 7,000 feet of vert at home?
Right.
In a day before you go in a reasonable amount of time. And like that just builds your safety margin so much. And I'm with that, it's like I think a lot of people see these big traverses, these big objectives by pros, but what doesn't get talked about much is that there is a progression into it. So it's like you can't negation acknowledged the like importance of progressing into these things instead of just going for that big like peak experience without having done the prep work.
Yeah, I mean, totally. The preparation is, and that's kind of something that's always like bothered me in the way that people talk about this, is they're just like, Alex Honnold is so crazy, you know? And you're like, well, I mean, dude, that would be like someone that's never driven a car, seeing you on a highway and being like, you're nuts, you're flying along at 80 miles an hour. You know, it's like, well, yeah, but you drive a car every day. Right. And similarly, what he's doing or what people are doing at a high level in the mountains, like is very related to that. They're just like miles and miles and miles and practice and practice and practice. And I mean, for example, in both the cuddle and the HURT, I mean, there wasn't a single route that they were on sighting. You know, I mean, Alex had practiced every stage of the cuddle or of the HURT at least once. And he knew it really well. I mean, he, like you said, he had the speed record on epinephrine, like 30 something minutes from bottom to top. And so when we got to the base and we spent like an hour debating what to do, and he was like eating food and resting and like washed his feet even. And we were sitting there and like Pete Mortimer and Brett were like, I don't think you should do it. And Chris and I were kind of like, I think you should do it.
It sounded like the mental crux for him was that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause he could just walk like 20 minutes, 30 minutes back out to the car, you know? And they were concerned about like, well, can you climb epinephrine safely? And he was just like, I mean, yeah, I've climbed this thing like a dozen times, you know, it's 5'9", and there was just like zero concern about his ability to be safe on the route. He ended up doing it in his approach shoes.
Yeah, and like for some people, 5'9" is scary.
Yeah,
but like 5'9" might be the hardest thing that they've done on gear. Maybe easy 5'10", I don't know. But for him, like he's climbed at least 5'13" on gear. He's soloed 5'13", honestly. So it's like, well, if we think about like scale of ability, like for a person that's a 5'9" climber, it'd be like them climbing 5'3".
Yeah, exactly. Like that. I mean, everything he did, even the hardest route into Wintada, which is 10C, but probably like 11A, which he did in the middle of the night, and he was like kind of tired. I mean, that's still, like you said, I mean, he climbs 514. Like it's number grades below his upper level. And I'm not saying anyone should solo, at any level below their ability, but just putting it into perspective of when people say that it's nuts, you're like, well, I mean, guy has got a lot of miles and a lot of comfort, and that can make up for a lot.
I'm going to transition off of this and to a topic that we've talked previously a long time ago. You may not even remember, but it's so military in the Alpine. And one, we've already hit fitness a little bit, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on fitness for the military there, and like what is missing to start.
I mean, a lot.
Big rocks. Pick the big rocks.
Yeah, I know that's like hard. It's I mean, the American military is, I think, woefully inadequate in the mountains. I mean, even if you look at like the 10th group, like special mountain warfare leaders course here or whatever, I mean, their final test out is to like go climb the first flat iron with double ropes, which like, I mean, I do it in less than
which has been done in rollerblades.
Yeah, no, I don't know about rollerblades, roller skates.
Roller skates, sure, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I done it in 40 minutes. It's like they do the entire day. And like Keener's, the thing that you and I did in like, what was that, like 5 hours?
4.5 hours car to car.
Yeah. I mean, they got stuck on it overnight and had an epic and had to get helicoptered off. And then like, they just don't, I mean, granted it was like in the spring and it was wintry conditions, but yeah, they just fundamentally like don't really know what they're doing. I think that's partly lack of technical proficiency and understanding, and we could go into all the systemic things like the fact that they've disbanded like full-time military climbing units, whereas you look at European partners that have like climbing teams, they're just like full-time pro climbers, but they're in the military and their whole job is to just like
the Brits have the Brits and the Chileans and the Brits and the Chileans have a 9-month course to train their military mountain guides or their military mountain leaders. And then the Austrians in the military can actually progress through IFMGA certification through the military.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, like Colin Haley has been considering joining the Italian army because they have a climbing team, and he was like, oh, I could just get like paid to climb all the time, which is what I do anyways. And I've hung out with members of the that's the rescue group. What's the French one? The GM.
I don't know.
The French military climbing team. I mean, they're just full-time pro climbers.
I mean, the Austrians, they actually, for their Olympic athletes, they bring them into the military so that they can pay them. Yeah,
exactly. And there's this resistance in our military to specialized skill sets, I think.
Yep.
When you see it.
We became a general force.
We became a general force
with this current war. Or not the current, but the Iraq-Afghanistan time period.
I mean, and you see it as an officer, right? Like they want you to progress through every single, get broadening, right? I mean, even at a micro level in the JAG Corps, like a lot of military JAGs are like very marginal lawyers because they never get to learn any one area of the law very well. Like every 2 years they switch because they want them to be like this generalist. And like, again, like, sorry guys, but I also don't care so much. Like they're pretty unimpressive because like they never get the chance to like actually become an expert in anything.
Yep. So what are you saying about expertise?
I think it has a high degree of value. And I mean, you see it sometimes, right? Like our units will attach specialists, like they'll attach an EOD specialist and when they deploy and those kinds of things. And or like even like tier 1 units they'll just take PJs because they're just like, we're not going to bother trying to be like operators and medics. Like we're just going to like take super high speed PJ medics with us. And so there's some recognition of that, right? Because you can't learn everything and you only have so much time.
So the reason I asked this question is because I've actually been surprised but there are a lot of military people that are like interested in alpine topics.
Mm,
And I'm curious as far as like, one, we've talked fitness. I think fitness is something that is outside the scope of this discussion per se, but it's like super, super important in the alpine. And there's plenty of places you can go to like learn more about like the fitness for going uphill, because it's very different from running even. Like if you want to go uphill through snow, it's a lot slower cadence. But I'm curious as far as like military mountain and alpine training, like you've talked some like say like speed climbing techniques you could apply to increase safety, because speed there are two means of safety in the mountains in my opinion. One is bring more shit so you can like deal with any sort of contingency. The other one is go lighter and faster.
Yeah, and I think the military errs on the bring more shit side. I mean, it's certainly at the conventional level, right? And there's reasons for that. I mean, it's just like the whole idea is to operate like broadly and like on massive numbers, and like at that scale, you're just never going to move quickly. And
so so the like 10th group 2 years ago put out an essay competition asking how can soft compete in polar and alpine environments.
Oh, really?
So I'm curious, like off the cuff, what would your answer be to how the U.S. military and or soft, if you want to focus on special operations, how can they compete in the polar and or alpine environment? What do they need to do?
Man, that's a long. I think. Well, I know that you wrote a white paper that I read, and I think there was some things in there that I would agree with in terms of they need to reestablish institutional knowledge, and you're never going to have institutional knowledge with guys that rotate every 2 years between assignments. Like I, for example, the 10th group schoolhouse here did look into an NCOIC who was a legit climber for a few years. But then they sent him to, now he's in Florida, like, or his last assignment from there. I don't know where he is now, but it's like, wow, you took I mean, how would you do? I can't imagine you like took that guy and you sat him in Florida and he's sitting inside a skiff all day. And I'm sure he's bringing value, obviously. But unless I think they have to reestablish the institutional knowledge, I think Europe has some interesting models to look at with those climbing teams. I think you pointed out like putting guys through guide training, that could be valuable. I mean, mountain guides are their own special breed of tweakerdom, but there are valuable skills that are like safety and rescue skills, and just being more ready to adopt new tactics and techniques. I remember talking to Eric, the guy that I'm talking about that was at the 10th group schoolhouse, and I was like, dude, you guys got it, like double ropes. Are you kidding me? Like you should be climbing on single ropes. You should be fixing everything. Guys should be following on a fix and follow with a micro traction, because then the leader is hands-free and not belaying. And then the guy like following, if he needs to just sit back and like pull out a rifle, he can, because he's like controlling some destiny. And he was like, dude, I hear you. He's like, per the Army manual or whatever that we still have to follow, we're not allowed to use a belay device or equivalent with moving parts. And I was like, are you kidding me? How many moving parts are in your M4? Like we rely on moving parts like constantly. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard.
That's interesting. Because I wonder if that comes from like, I don't even know where that comes from, because like rope access uses things with moving parts all the time. And like, I call them sort of the subject matter experts on going up ropes.
Yeah.
And like, yes, what you like the Austrians. So I went through the Austrians mountain warfare course, and what they teach is essentially creating a via ferrata using rope that people can travel along. And then like, exactly as you're saying, if you have something that can prevent you from sliding down, whether it be an ascender, a T-block, traction, or something else that is a one-way thing, kind of like, I don't know, rope soloing on top rope, then like you can absolutely do exactly what you said, which is pull security while you're moving in vertical terrain, which like I wouldn't want to conduct military operations where I'm being shot at in vertical terrain. That would be terrible. But yeah, there's so much that you could do there.
Yeah, but maybe you're getting up, like maybe you need to set up an OP. I mean, maybe you got a small team that's got to set up an OP on a high point, right? And it's like semi-technical.
And the same applies for like if you need to
you need to I mean, like getting, oh, I lost, yeah. But yeah, I mean, if you got to get like weapons and batteries up somewhere, like that's shit's heavy, and you're going to have to like establish something safe.
And even if it's
So-
not vertical terrain, then you still, like, what do you do to maneuver a conventional force through third class terrain even?
Yeah.
Or like a step around a cliff? It's the same thing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, there's like endless stories, right? Of like entire infantry units just being paralyzed by like a choke point of terrain. And yeah, I mean, it gets when you're, I mean, even just a standard combat load weighs, I mean, if you've got literally just kit and 7 mags, that's what, 30 pounds, 40. I mean, I can't really see going on and op with less than 40, right?
It's at least 30 in just like ammo and kit.
Yeah. So, even if you're going pretty lightweight, which I mean, like soft, like, SF is usually double combat load, but like, even if it's a single combat load, you're carrying enough weight that trivial terrain gets
Hard.
treacherous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I mean, I don't really know what the answers are. I mean, I'm starting to work with some of those guys a bit to help develop some things, and see what the right answers are for them. I mean, I'm a big fan of, like traction devices and things like that. I mean, in the military context, you're not sending, like, there's no delineation between like freeing a route, like no one cares.
Yeah, if you read the basic military, or excuse me, not the operational planners doctrine, I forget the FM number right now, but the first paragraph in it is that you have 2 enemies when you're conducting military operations in the alpine or in mountain environments. The first is the environment, and you have to survive the environment in order to face the actual enemy.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, there's certain environments where you just like can't realistically operate in, like my buddy, a friend of mine, there's a couple of his NSW deployments were to Europe, and so they did a lot of cross training with like the Norwegians and stuff, and they learned a lot of valuable lessons. I think that's one thing, like, is those guys have held on to some institutional knowledge, so cross training with them. But he was like, yeah, I mean, like those temperatures, like you're not war fighting, it's just you're just maneuvering, but like he's like, you can't operate a rifle, so yeah, I don't know. I would say I have like nuggets and I have thoughts. I don't know any answers on that kind of stuff, but certainly there is a need to like reestablish institutional knowledge. I think that's just like a total given because it's completely lacking. And then I would say, I mean, as in general, from military guys transitioning into the mountains, needing the need to realize like to let go of the slow and heavy mindset. And I guess there's a difference between if we're talking about operating in the mountains versus just recreational in the mountains.
Well, I think what you said applies to both, right? I think in the mountains, like we have a lot of a focus on like the slow and heavy, which like you just have to be more fit to do that. And even if you are more fit, it still drains way more out of you when you do it.
Right.
Is the extra weight equal to what you gain by having that safety margin of extra stuff? And like, I know, like if you have space in the pack, that you're going to fill it, like you're going to carry more shit. So like, I think recreationally and military, it's like, can you build your technical knowledge? Can you build your fitness? And then is what you're bringing actually necessary to bring?
Yeah, I mean, another like, it's always fun to give him a hard time. I mean, another leg up I had on Honnold this summer, like we went and did that Blitz and Ridge thing, which is like, it's kind of a long day-ish. It was like 16-mile round trip, I think, like 5,000 for something. It's this really fun big.
If you ask somebody in the military, 16 miles a long day, they're like, oh, fuck, that's hard.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a long way. And so I'm like, I want to be lightweight. So like I took a fanny pack with a 500 mil soft flask with a filter, with the squeeze filter. And Alex brought like a bullet size pack, like a 12 liter-ish thing with like 2 or 3 liters of water. And I was like, well, dude, I was like, I know we're going to cross water, you know, at multiple points along the way. Obviously, once we like start up the mountain, I'm not going to have water for, you know, a few hours until we get back down and around. But like, basically, I just like did the math and also have like trained myself enough and like know that I can like be fairly efficient. I know we're going to be high up. I know that I'm going to like, I'm only carrying a light jacket and I'm going to like maintain my layering so that I'm not sweating and like losing a lot of water. And I'll be fucking thirsty when we get back to the river, but that's fine. And so fundamentally, you know, at the end of the day, I was like, I went with a fanny pack instead of a big, heavy pack full of water, like big, heavy. I mean, it was like 10 pounds, but, because I just knew that by carrying less weight and by being lighter, I was going to use less water, need less, but also would encounter it along the way and not be totally hosed. And that kind of planning ahead, I think can go a long way, and set yourself up for success.
So with that planning, I'm imagining you did one of two things. One, you'd run the route before and you learned doing it that way, or you'd been in that zone. Or two, you looked at a map and saw where you crossed water. So
yeah, I just looked at the water. Yeah, I looked at a map and I knew the water sources were reliable, you know. It wasn't like a question as to whether like those lakes are going to be there. They were very assured.
Yeah, and I mean, you did the same thing when you and I ran up Long's Peak, where like you brought a filter because you knew we were going to cross water. Granted, I did have to share water at one point.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know, had to. You
Sure, I offered.
Yeah. Yeah, when I did the diamond record, it was like the same thing. I had one 500 ml soft flask because I just knew, you know, it's like we talked about when you get fatigued, right? And everything compounds. It's like the same thing with like, the more you carry, the slower you go, the more you need.
Yep.
Fit and you can move quickly. You can cover a lot more terrain quickly and you can get a lot done before you like need that resupply. And so I don't know what it like, if again, putting the tactical hat on, more the failure point or like it all going wrong. The worst case scenario isn't just like you got really dehydrated, like it, you know, it's could be you lose a gunfight because you're out of ammo. So that's certainly more pertinent. But even if we're talking about moving over technical terrain, if it looks like that's what, well, going a little bit lighter, increasing your odds a little bit more on one side means that much faster through that terrain where you're really exposed. I think there's an argument to be made in those situations.
Sure.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. I mean, I think navigation does have an important piece, you know, for sure. I mean, even like I got lost in Highlight Canyon last year, like just getting to the base of an ice climb because you're like in the trees and like trying to go uphill through terrible snow and then end up in the wrong gully. And that kind of stuff can happen. So it's all relative, I think, the navigation piece.
But like, I mean, we've been talking about like technical stuff, and using a map and compass is one of those technical things.
Yeah.
That like, if you have that in your toolkit, then it's no issue.
Right.
And if you don't have it in your toolkit, then it can very easily turn into an emergency situation. Like so many of the rescues off the 14ers in Colorado, because people love to roll up those and then aren't expecting weather to come in. And it's like, if you aren't prepared and you don't know the zone, like you can always prepare beforehand by getting to know the map of the area, by printing a map and laminating it if you want. There's so many options for being prepared if you don't know a zone. And that's my primary goal with this, is to teach people the tools that they can be prepared for a zone when they've never been there before, so that they can feel more confident going into that zone.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, printing off a map. I mean, like I'm like notorious for literally pulling out a topo like mid-pitch, you know, just like, oh God, where's the anchor supposed to be? You know?
Yeah.
And like, I mean, I use Gaia a lot in the backcountry. Similarly, you know,
I use CalTopo, but then I export the GPX to whatever navigation app I'll use.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, there is no substitute. I mean, even on these like objectives in the park, you know, just like I ran in and like did Mount Alice this summer, and like there's no substitute for being able to read a topographic map. Like even if you're doing it on Gaia on your phone and it's showing you where you are on it, like you need to understand what all those squiggles mean and like what the implications of them being really close together are. Like, this is nuts.
And like you like to go fast and light, and I'd say that isn't even an excuse for, say, like not bringing a compass, because like visibility drops and you get turned around. Like it happened, like HURT, that's how he lost his legs on Mount Washington, even though he'd been up there dozens and dozens of times.
Yeah.
And like there are compasses that literally go on the side of your watch that are like the size of a dime.
Yeah.
Like, well, at least point north.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually had a funny, Kelly Cordes and I were in Cody, ice climbing up in Cody last spring, and we were like walking back in the dark, and it was like kind of a blowing snowstorm, and we had brought like super light tennis shoes in case we needed to like wade across the river, and like trash bags, like you put trash bags on it in the tennis shoes and then your feet stay dry. And then we'd stash them, and then we're like, oh, it's in this clearing under this big tree. Like this will be super easy to find. And we came back in the dark, and it was like a blowing snowstorm. And we were like, shit, A, we're not sure where our shoes are. And then B, we need to find where we crossed the river, because it was like the one part that was frozen enough that we didn't break through. And the Garmin like watch track, I just by chance had like tracked our approach, and the fact like being able to retrace exactly was like the only reason that we stuck it.
Yeah. I mean, we talk pace plans in the military, right? Like primary is generally going to be your memory from like where you went, where you've been, and then the maps or preparation you've done. 2 is going to be probably like some sort of digital something, which in that case you had your breadcrumb trail. And then what happens when that watch fails, right? And then maybe your contingency is like you've recorded the coordinates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's, Cody is like fairly big wide open terrain, so we didn't think a whole lot about it. But, we were familiar with big features of like, we know that like before I even remembered that I could look at my watch, we were like handrailing off the cliff line to our right, and we could like kind of see in the moonlight, even though it was like shitty weather, we'd get breaks, and it was like, oh, that's Mean Green. Like that's that massive couloir with the huge ice climb coming down it. We know that's there. We know that we got to cross the river before we get to that, right? And like there was still, I think probably just honestly because we both spent enough time in the mountains, there was like an automatic referencing that we had done in the beginning of the day that we could go back to, just because like that's just how we operate, right? We just know to like have certain features in mind and to like navigate off those.
Yeah.
So I think you got to do that more overtly in the beginning, and like think about it a bit more consciously, and then it will just become natural. That
if you don't practice doing it the right way, then it's never going to become natural.
Yeah, totally.
Cool.
Yeah. Does that cover? Yeah. What do we not? Anything you were like hoping to cover that we didn't?
I was excited to see where this went. So,
okay.
Anything else you'd like to share before we sign off? Because we are over the time we planned.
Not particular. I think one of the like towards the end there, we touched on something that I'm big on, which is the European kind of mindset that speed is safety. And I think moving quickly within a margin of safety is like a thing that I'm a big fan of, especially when you're in those environments where div hazard can be a thing. Like getting out of them as quickly as possible. Something I'm a big fan of.
Yeah. Don't epic, and to not epic, you need to have the skill set and the fitness. I'd say fitness being like potentially the number one biggest bucket, because you can never have too big of a bucket of fitness.
Yeah, you can never have too much fitness. Yeah, 100%.